Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of our immunity series. If you missed it last week, I shared 5 food-based hacks to support your kids' immune system so they can dodge the winter illnesses. So you can go back and listen to that if that sounds like something you might be interested in. That episode is full of really practical, specific tips that you can implement in the kitchen in terms of the food that you're cooking and providing for your family that can make a huge difference to their immune system. Today we're switching gears a little bit and I'm going to be sharing 3 questions to ask before giving your child antibiotics. So this is going to be a gentle guide, I guess, to making informed decisions about antibiotics, because sometimes they're needed and sometimes there's a better first step. So look, antibiotics can be life-saving when they're truly needed. And I often say that I'm grateful to be a mum, a parent, in a day and age where antibiotics are readily available, because we know they have made a massive difference in children's well-being. You know, there was a time not too long ago when infections used to lead to some pretty dire consequences in children. And so we are grateful to have access to antibiotics, but they're not always the best or the only option when our kids get sick. And I think it's really important for parents to feel confident, to feel informed when making a decision about antibiotics, and not just say yes to every script without asking a few key questions, which is what I'm going to be going through today. So I'm going to be sharing 3 simple, respectful questions that you can ask your doctor before giving your child antibiotics. These questions are not confrontational. They're conversation starters, really, so that you can, or to help, they're conversations to help you make the best decision for your child's health and immunity in the long term. And I wanted to cover this topic because we see all too often, you know, the negative implications of kids that have taken too many antibiotics, or antibiotics when they haven't been absolutely necessary, particularly in early life. So a couple of reminders about antibiotics. Antibiotics only work for bacterial infections, not for viruses like colds or flus or RSV, which is becoming more and more common. Antibiotics, are commonly overprescribed and overused. And this is a problem because the overuse of antibiotics can contribute to gut imbalances, immune issues, and also on a bigger kind of picture scale, antibiotic resistance, which is a huge health threat. And especially, that health threat is getting bigger and bigger, where when we're overusing and antibiotics are being overprescribed, we end up with this situation where, infections certain bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. They don't work anymore. And that's going to, lead to us not having any options for some pretty scary, bacterial infections. So this is a problem on an individual level, of course, when we're talking about our kids' individual health, their microbiome health. When we think about antibiotics, they kill bacteria, and that includes the beneficial bacteria within our kids' gut microbiome and other microbiomes of their body as well. But it's also, as I said, a bigger picture problem as well, where we want to make sure that when and if we need antibiotics, they are going to be, they're going to work. So this episode isn't about saying no to antibiotics. It's about asking, is this really the best option right now? So let's talk through these questions. So the first question is, are these absolutely necessary? That is an absolutely valid question to be asking your doctor. So it's a simple and direct way to understand your doctor's reasoning. It opens the door for a more thoughtful conversation rather than just automatically filling the script. And some doctors feel the pressure to prescribe even when they're not 100% sure antibiotics are needed. I think this is the other, the flip side of this problem is that it's not just doctors overprescribing when they shouldn't. It's society's expectation that they're going to leave the doctor's room with a script. They've made the time to go to the appointment. They've paid for the appointment. They don't want to leave. A lot of people don't want to leave with just make sure you keep fluids up and rest and you'll be fine. A lot of people want to leave with a script. So that puts pressure on doctors. And some doctors feel like that is what the client or patient wants. So they feel obliged to write a script. So the question again is, are these absolutely necessary? And this question is important because many childhood infections, for example, ear infections, are often viral and resolve on their own. And even, antibiotics aren't even going to be effective because they're viral. They're a viral infection, and antibiotics work on bacterial infections, not viral infections. So, ear infections are a great example of that. Most ear infections do not need antibiotics. Another reason that this question matters is that asking this question gives your doctor the space to explain or even reconsider their script. So, an example way that you might ask this, it doesn't have to be direct or rude. We can say, look, I just want to double check. Do you think this infection would definitely get worse without antibiotics? Or is it one that we could monitor for a few days? Like I said, it's a conversation starter. We don't need to be rude. We don't need to be, divisive or argumentative. It's just about asking these questions and starting the conversation. The second question that we want to ask before giving our kids antibiotics is this likely to be a bacterial infection? So antibiotics won't touch viral infections, but it's not always obvious which is which, especially with overlapping symptoms. So when we ask this question to our doctor, it helps them or invites our doctor to walk you through their clinical reasoning. There's not a quick test that doctors can do to tell them whether this infection is bacterial and viral, and often they'll err on the side of caution and prescribe antibiotics, even if they're leaning towards clinical reasoning that it's probably more viral in nature, or it probably is a virus. So in many cases, especially in general practice, as I said, antibiotics are prescribed just in case. And if there's no sign of bacterial infection, for example, some signs of bacterial infections can include things like fever, pus, or even a lab confirmation, like a test that tells us it's bacterial. A wait and see approach may be safer. And so, again, we don't have to be rude or argumentative with this question. We could say something like, just so I understand, is there a reason you suspect this is bacterial rather than viral? Again, opening up that conversation, and it allows our doctor to, sort of explain more, or even sort of go, well, actually, I don't know, so I'm just prescribing these just in case. And so you can have a conversation about that. The third question, can we wait a day or two to see how they go? So this question is about giving your child's immune system a chance to do its job first. In naturopathy, we talk a lot about, the whole sort of premise with naturopathy is strengthening our own body's cells, systems, organs so that they can do the job themselves. Pharmaceutical medication often comes in, and sometimes this is necessary and sort of does the job for us. But many infections will resolve on their own with rest, fluid, and natural support. So this question is, like I said, it's about giving our child's immune system a chance to see if it can fight the infection first while keeping an antibiotic script in your back pocket if and when it might be needed. So delayed prescribing, otherwise known as like a backup script, is a well-established and safe practice in medicine. So we can, again, chat to our doctor, see what their thoughts are in terms of like, how urgent is this? Can we wait a little bit and see? Write the script. I've got it there if I need it, but could we wait and see? They might say, no, it's really important you get onto antibiotics ASAP, and they'll give their reasoning for that. Again, it starts that conversation, and then you leave the doctor's office, the doctor's clinic, with more information so that you can make an informed choice as a parent. And, I'm in no way saying you should, go against what a doctor's saying if they are saying this is urgent that you get onto these antibiotics as soon as possible. So a way that you might phrase this could be something like, would it be safe to wait a day or two? Or like more specific, would it be safe to wait 48 hours before filling this just to see if they start to improve on their own? Again, it's gentle, it's conversational, you're not sort of questioning their knowledge or expertise. You're just asking the question. You as the parent are going to be the one that deals with any long-term effects that antibiotics may have on a child. And look, the odd course of antibiotics here and there are going to be absolutely okay for most children. There are certain kids that are, have more sensitive systems. It can be really heartbreaking. We get these comments in the Natural Super Kids Club with our members quite often, like, oh, they've got a staph infection. I needed to give them antibiotics. But I'm so disappointed because we've been working on their gut health for months and months and months, and they've just started to turn a corner, and feeling like antibiotics are going to, kind of bring you back to step one or back to the start again, and that's not necessarily the case. So it's a balanced kind of view we need to have when we're considering antibiotics. There's pros and there's cons. So I also just want to add that if you do need to give your kids antibiotics, I would highly recommend some post-antibiotic support, or even some support while they're taking antibiotics, to ensure that the side effects of antibiotics are minimized and any long-term negative health consequences of taking antibiotics are minimized as well. So the first most important one is we want to replenish that good bacteria that we are potentially wiping out from a course of antibiotics, or 2 courses, or whatever it might be. So we can do this with probiotic supplements. This is where probiotic supplements really come in. We can add in, probiotic foods, fermented foods, things like that as well. But a really good quality probiotic supplement is really important to be giving any child who has had or is on antibiotics. Now, we can give this at the same time as the antibiotics. We don't have to wait until they've finished the antibiotics, but we want to separate probiotics from the antibiotics. So, we want to try and give them a couple of hour break. We don't want to give them together. Probiotics really important. Fermented foods and probiotic foods. We can also support their gut health with prebiotic foods that help to nourish the good bacteria within the gut. So things like garlic, onions, bananas, oats, rye. You can even get prebiotic supplements like partially hydrolyzed guar gum is one of our favorites here at Natural Super Kids, PHGG for short. And we love it because it's tasteless, it mixes in with water really well, and it's a powerful prebiotic which feeds and nourishes the probiotics, the good bugs. And we just want to support gut health and in any way that we can. So things like bone broths, gentle like soups and stews with bone broth in, gelatin gummies can be a really good way to gently, heal any damage that is done by antibiotics to the gut as well. All right. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope those questions are helpful next time you take your child to the doctor's appointment. And if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would love for you to share it with a friend, send it to them, or share the episode. Take a screenshot and tag us and share it in your Instagram stories. Any way that we can get the word out to more parents about these really important questions to ask when your child is prescribed antibiotics, is always going to be a good thing. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we're talking about fever and about the things you need to know as a parent when it comes to fever. I'll see you then. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.